Appreciate it. So some of you I know are my clients who are joining in. So I know you all know who I am, but basically my name is Lisa and I have been doing choice in the SNSP side of things since I think 2020. I was trying to think about it earlier today, but I think it's been about 5 years since I've been a part of this and have been at Wagner for 8 years. So I have a lot of information that I've gathered that I wanted to share. So for those of you, this is your first time kind of doing a training with me. I'm basically trying to present this information for each of these types of audits that are required if you are in the choice SNSP programs, to give you that auditor's perspective so that you can, when you're getting requests and information to be gathered for the audit, you know and understand kind of the why behind it, and also taking a look at some potential non-compliance and things that we do see. So I've done 2 others prior to this, and then this one will be the enrollment side of things, specifically for choice. So SNSP is a beast of its own, and it has a lot of compliance requirements, and that's something I'm going to look into at doing next year regarding the same timing, and also doing a reporting one too in the future as well. So with that being said, let's get started. So our learning objectives, we're going to understand each of the audit sections required. And basically, as I kind of already mentioned, just some non-compliance things that you can kind of be on the lookout for and paying attention to so that you can avoid non-compliance items and not have to have that non-compliance getting reported to a DPI when your report is submitted. This is kind of a overarching, we're not going to necessarily, we're going to hit each section, but it's not necessarily like the biggest deep dive either. So there is obviously resources that DPI has that goes in even more links. They offer trainings, etc. So this is a start to get information to you, or maybe just, again, you've been through audits and are like, I don't know why they're asking me for this. But making sure you're utilizing your resources outside of this as well, which DPI has a lot of them. So with that, kind of some things that I'll be utilizing is just choice. I'll be saying that a lot. It's just the private school choice program, or PSCP, choice for short. And then there will be some mentions of the SNSP program, which, if those are, you're not familiar with that abbreviation, that is the special needs scholarship program side of things. It impacts, if you are a participant of both, it does impact the other. So that's why it's going to be mentioned. And then DPI, Department of Public Instruction. And then we will also be talking about the SIS. So that is that Student Information System. So timing of this, for those who work with me, we are already ready to go and have it on the calendar for November. And that is primarily where you're going to see that timing of field work for the enrollment side for the fall. So with that third count date in September, we come out in November to then issue a report by December 15th. So you might ask yourself, okay, Lisa, well, why are you waiting until November? Like September to November, like you could work through that. Well, that's where that financial audit side of things, that's due October 15th. And then DPI does not issue the reports we need to start our procedures until late October. So that is why we kind of sit in this November month to get most of this work done. Now, as you can see, that is 1 month to work through the audit. Obviously, for you, it'll be approximately 2 to 3 days, where a lot of the times we're going to be on site for 2 to 3 days. I do it for most of my clients. And then there might be some wrap that has happened after the fact, but a lot of the work is done in a short amount of time. And then it's also due within a short amount of time as well on December 15th. So the September enrollment audit is the hardest deadline, in that we literally have a month and a half, less than if your field work is scheduled for late November. So it is crucial that when you're getting these preparation lists from your auditors, that you are getting the information ready, prepared, and good to go so that you are meeting that deadline. Because that is one thing DPI does not offer. They do not offer extensions. So if you are late, then you are late. And they won't grant any sort of exceptions. And potentially what ends up happening if you end up being late, you might have a delay in your funding being received. So it is crucial that the information is given and completed, and you're working with your auditors to meet that October 15th deadline. Then we do have a second count date. So that is the second Friday in January, where you're taking a look at kind of the midpoint of the school year. And we do have to do procedures over that. Typically, the timing can vary. This report isn't due until the first business day in May. So there is a lot of time that you can kind of fit this in to what works for you and what works for your auditors. So my team and I, we start sometimes in January to just get a good start. And then we're working through February and March to wrap things up. And this is a lot less work than the fall one, just because we're not actually looking at applications. And so it typically only takes a day on our end to work through all of those procedures. But again, these both are deadline driven audits. So just very important either way to make sure that information is provided to the auditors timely. With the September audit too, that is typically then held in conjunction with the fiscal practice audit. So that was the training I did last year. 13 components that we take a look at usually, and that's again why it's 2 to 3 days. We are looking at both typically at the same time. My team, we have someone do the fiscal practice side of things, and the other person does the enrollment side of things. And why the January side, we don't have to redo a fiscal practice, which then also helps reduce the number of days. So I broke out kind of the sections that were required. They're not standard sections per se, but per like DPI, you're not going to see a 14-step sections. They do have a huge audit program that you can look up on the DPI website. You can look at what we're specifically testing. It's a very long document, and you can look at it. It is public information. If you wanted more information than I'm providing today, you can definitely look at the audit procedures that we will be looking at in the requirements that we are testing too. So it's not necessarily their format is not broken out into 14, but for the sake of this presentation, I did put them into 14 different sections. So we are going to take a look at each one of these, talking through what that actually means at a higher level, as well as that non-compliance piece of, hey, as an auditor, what am I seeing that a lot of schools are struggling with? So with that, we will get into inquiries. So if you're familiar with audits, you get asked a lot of questions. There are a lot of questions we have to ask regarding just follow-up clarification, but also those that are required. And so a part of those required inquiries is we have to ask about fraud. I always like to preface when I talk to my clients, this does not mean that we suspect fraud, wrongdoing, misappropriation. Not at all. It is just a requirement that we have to follow up on, and also just your assessment of where do you think fraud could exist. More things as well as we have to look at changes in operation, contested applications, any sort of eligibility issues that you're aware of, any corrections or additions to the count. Those questions kind of give us an indication then if there will be changes that we need to report in any of the schedules once we finalize to get the report to DPI. Having, you might ask yourself, like, eligibility issues or corrections, like, not at all. And it's like, that does happen. That's why we always ask. We don't assume that there's going to be problems, but we always make sure so that if you have something that needs to be changed, that just happens. Their name might have changed that didn't get reported until this later when the applications weren't completed. So we have to update that with DBI. Things like that that happen that are minor corrections is good to know up front so that we have a good idea of what we're coming into. Typically, there's not additions to the count that I've seen. It's mostly just potentially some minor corrections that need to happen. Okay, so procedures. So this number 2 is talking about your procedures, not necessarily the audit procedures, your procedures on how you kind of complete several things. So we have to get an understanding of how you take attendance, how you accept applications, how you process and maintain records, as well as receiving and sending transcripts, and how the count information is compiled, including how you determine whether or not they're present or if they should be in the choice program. So a lot of the times we'll have you write up a memo to get this information. Otherwise, there is a lot of the times I know schools will have policy and some procedure manuals that will be super helpful. So we do take a look at that. There are sometimes we have recommendations with the process that depending on making sure that there's just proper checks and balances, applications are being properly reviewed, attendance is being reviewed, and things like that. But this is not something where we're seeing non-compliance that we're writing up per se to DPI. It's just a matter of collecting information for our purposes to ensure that you're doing what you need to do, and that when we get the attendance records, that they are completed properly. Staff roster. So we are required to obtain a staff roster, including titles. This is kind of going along with those processes and procedures. We are trying to get an understanding of who is involved, and even so, kind of going into our inquiries. We are required to potentially reach out to the individuals who are taking attendance or that are reviewing applications that might not necessarily be a part of the audit preparation, but are key people in the processes. And so we will have a request for a staff roster. And if you're familiar with the fiscal practice side of things or attended my training last year, we then utilize the staff roster and the enrollment side of things to ensure that you are also obtaining the information for the fiscal practice. So that's education certifications, background checks, compensation agreements, etc. So it is a twofold process here where we obtain it for 2 reasons. And again, a staff roster is a staff roster. Obviously, not necessarily non-compliance, but we want to ensure that it is complete and that it does include not just teachers, it includes administrative staff, potentially maintenance, and administrative staff as well, individuals who are helping with the bookkeeping side of things, all of that too. It's not just teachers and their grades. School calendar. So we are required to get the school calendar. And obviously there are times where we won't have that as a request list because you post it on your website. So we can easily gain it and obtain it from the school website. But we have to maintain this to verify that you actually had school on the count date. And obviously there are extenuating circumstances. I know, I believe it was last year that we had a huge snowstorm on the count date. And so there are requests to get alternative count dates in there as well. And not just the 3rd Friday in September or 2nd Friday in January. So there are options of that. And if there is an alternative count date used for those circumstances, obviously we should not be seeing snow in September. I might have spoke too soon, but you want to make sure you're getting that approved with an alternative count date with DPI, because we will request that you receive proper approval if there were some certain circumstances. Okay. Next, you have probably heard of this. It's the 1207. So the 1207 is the form where you are indicating to DPI the number of total students that you have at the school. This is at the specific grade level in all students, not just necessarily choice. So we do require to obtain that. And the key thing here is we are looking to compare that to the attendance records and the student roster. So we compare the totals to this to ensure that everything is matching. So you should have matching totals between these documents. The key thing here is the count date. So a lot of times what we see when we get the 1207 is the 1207 was not completed based on the count date. So whether that is the formal third Friday in September or second Friday in January, or an alternative date was used, a lot of the times what we'll see is that it was based on the attendance levels on the date they're completing it, which is obviously after the count date, typically. And so you really want to make sure that the 1207 is of that date, as well as the attendance records and student roster. A lot of the times, we'll get student rosters that are as of that date and time that we're asking, and not actually when the count date occurred. Because what ends up happening is we look at the 1207 and compare to the attendance records. There's a discrepancy of one student in a grade. We ask and they're like, oh, they just joined a week after the count date. Well, obviously they are not a part of the count because they were not present on the count. So then we have to have you amend the 1207. Or we have issues with student rosters where there will be students on there that have already withdrawn before the count date. And so we test the student roster and then end up having to expand to more students because a student who shouldn't have even been on there got selected. So it is possible to amend the 1207. If there is something that does come up during the audit, it's required to amend it. So it's not as though if you made a mistake or incorrectly counted that you can't fix it. That's easy enough. We will have you go in, amend it, and then we will report the updated numbers to DPI when the report is submitted. But it's obviously, again, that time crunch piece. If you are not completing everything by the count date and everything has discrepancies, that is just time that you have to amend it. We have to follow up with questions. So it just makes it really smooth if you're all making sure that it is on that count date. Okay. Attendance records. So already kind of mentioned those. We compare them to a lot of things. We have to obtain the official attendance records. So if they are manipulatable, in essence, and they might be electronic, and then potentially there is the ability to edit the attendance, we always want to make sure that you're printing those out and getting those signed by the teachers for accuracy. Manually done if someone else in the process is coming to rooms and doing attendance on the count date, making sure that the teacher is verifying accuracy. So we do verify that these are signed to make sure that it is correct and that the teacher has reviewed those. As I kind of already mentioned too, the 1207 is compared to the attendance records and then is also utilized during the testing of choice applications. So the attendance records are huge because we are utilizing that in a lot of places. And we'll kind of talk through what that means for the choice applications and other students in a couple slides from now. But it's really important that you have that information ready and available, and making sure that the information is complete. What do I mean by that? We want to make sure that you have the attendance records that are being signed and provided that show attendance for everybody on the count date. But if they're absent, it's also showing attendance for those students before and after the count date, so that we can verify, in fact, they should be included in the count date. And this is for all students. I'm going to talk about that a bit more, but you want to make sure that you are providing us a support to support that every student was in attendance either the day of or the day before and after. So just something a lot of the times we miss is that we get attendance records and there was a student that was missing on the count date, and we didn't get the attendance records initially for before and after. There's a lot of ways to do this. Some of my schools have the ability to print out attendance records for a period of time on one document. So for grade, you can do it all the way prior and to after to show attendance. Others run reports specifically after that and attach them as separate reports. So there's just a lot of ways to do it, but we really want to be making sure that you are providing us with a complete attendance record for the count. And a big thing here too is if your student information system doesn't generate choice and SNSP kind of indicators, it's important that on the attendance records, you are indicating if the student is choice and SNSP. It is the responsibility on your end to indicate that, so that we can also compare that to what we are seeing on the reports we're getting from DPI regarding choice or SNSP, if that's applicable to your school. A lot of the times, the SIS information systems, they're not equipped to have that as a kind of filter and tag for the student's profile. So we recommend just obviously highlighting or some sort of indication that you have to identify that they are a choice student. Okay, applications. So this is where we get into really the kind of main reason why we're here. The applications of choice students. So this is a pretty in-depth process that we have to go through. And obviously, I'm sure all of you at this point, you've been through it as of right now. So you know that there's just a lot of information that you have to obtain and check. Plugging DPI's checklist for applications, making sure you have all the right information. And as a result of that, it's a lot of information we have to check. So you might ask yourself, why in the world are they asking for all applications? Like, you really need all applications? Yes, we do. Most of the schools I work with, all but one, do not meet this kind of requirement of we have to test the greater of 125 or 15% of family applications. Why? Because they have less than 125 applications. So typically we are required to test 100% from my experience. Obviously, if you are a bigger school and have more than 125, then you are likely going to have the auditor pick a sample. That sample is determined by DPI. They do a random number assortment that we have to test. We don't even have any sort of decision-making in that aspect if for some reason you are more than 125. Now you might ask yourselves, well, Lisa, I have 125 students in choice. They still ask for all of them. Well, it is the key thing here. We're talking about family applications. So if there's a family of 4, that counts as 1. And we have to test 4 of them, even though per DPI and how they do their metrics that's only one application. So it's likely you could have 140 students in choice, but you only have 75 family applications. That happens a lot. Another key thing here too is if for some reason you are able to be sampled and we only have to test the 125 or potentially 15% of family applications, and we find an error, we have to extend the population to an additional, whether it's the 125 or the 15%, whichever is greater. So typically, I'm like, even the school that I have more than 125 family applications, something happens to where unfortunately something was missed and we have to test 100% regardless. So a lot of the times it's still good to just provide all the applications ahead of time while the auditor is there or remotely, either if you're sharing a folder, to make sure that we just have all the information up front and don't have to re-ask you for application information. The things we're testing. So these are some key things, and I'll go through each one and then kind of what we see in regards to potentially errors. Again, not saying any of this is intentionally done, but just things happen. So first and last name to attendance records. We are comparing the DPI report that they give us, we download, to the attendance report, and we're comparing the student's first and last name. What ends up happening here is that in the attendance records, you might have their preferred name, an abbreviated name, a nickname on the attendance records. So it's really important that you have their legal name on the attendance records. And when they're generated, it's the legal name. And you can put in parentheses their preferred name for teachers if they're utilizing those reports to remember what the student goes by. If it's their legal name is Nicholas and they go by Nick, their attendance record should show Nicholas. Obviously, with parentheses, you can put Nick, but it should be their legal name, because if what ends up happening, if there is a difference, we have to ask for more information, whether that's a birth certificate or an immunization report. So it just makes it a lot easier if up front the attendance records have that legal name. Obviously, things could happen. Their name could have potentially been changed. Maybe they just got adopted, or different family dynamics where they had a change in last name. So things can happen where we will then, if there is a difference and discrepancy, we'll ask for support and the kind of adoption records, name change records as well. But again, just making sure, if you can, having those names be automatically the legal name, and making sure they're updated as necessary. And if not, having that backup information ready to go. We have to test the grade to the attendance records. So we want to make sure the student, per their attendance records, are in the correct grade per DPI. There has been things where a student changed grades because they were potentially put into a higher grade that they shouldn't have been, based on pre-testing. So we will have some discrepancies here with slight changes like that. Those are, even with the first and last name and grade, those are just changes we do report to DPI on the more simplistic ends of things. But again, it's just more making sure that everything is kind of correlating. Then we talk about presence and absence to the attendance records. As I already mentioned, we do get that attendance report. We are verifying that either they were on the day of the attending on the day of the count date or the day and after. It's not and or, it's and after. So that Friday, September date, I believe it's on the 19th, if my memory serves me correctly, this year. So if it's on the 19th and they didn't come, we need a day before the 19th and a day after the 19th to make sure that they were properly included in the count. We also have to look at school districts. This is important because where the funding comes we need to make sure that we're reporting it to the correct school district. So having those school district verification records. This is the point of the presentation where we are not going to go into where the school district verification records are allowable and what DPI accepts. This is the surface level set of things. So again, utilizing the DPI resources to make sure you are providing the auditors the proper school district verification records. We also verify address to residency documentation. And again, this is kind of the surface level thing. We have to verify a lot of things, including the parent's name has to match. If it doesn't match, we have to follow up to make sure we get an email from the parent. So as you kind of work through the application cycle, if there are differences like that, if the name on the address residency documentation doesn't match, getting the email from the parent right away so that you have it to where we don't have to have follow-up questions. Hey, it's Joe on the address residency documentation, and per DPI, it's Joseph. Because as you know, we are busy, parents are busy, you are busy. And so what ends up potentially happening is we're waiting on the parents to respond to an email, which can delay things. So getting that as soon as possible is a really good best practice approach. And then we also are comparing income to income documentation that it matches or is also below the income threshold. So it might sometimes potentially doesn't match. Then we have to just verify it is not above the income threshold. DPI does a great job in their kind of screens that they present during this process of indicating what support as the school you should be getting from the parents, whether that's a 1040, a wage statement, etc., depending on what the application, what the parents had indicated on their application. It's really important to ensure that it's correct and allowable. For example, one year we got the 1040, the school got the 1040. The 1040 was the year before. So it should have been the 2023 1040. But it in fact was a 2022 1040. So making sure that as you are obtaining this documentation from the parents, that it is actually what is needed and what is required. Again, can't preface this enough, is using the DPI application checklist so that you are making sure for each application that you're getting these required items. And then for anyone that does the Department of Revenue method of income, we don't test that. We're not required to since the testing's already done. But it's those that are reporting wages like their 1040 wage statement, etc. So we kind of already prefaced a few of these. So common issues is the name doesn't match, the grade doesn't match. We're not provided enough attendance information. I can't reiterate that enough. With that too, we also need to see if the student is absent, why they're absent, what are the notes on their absence. You might ask yourself why we need that. Well, we have to verify that the reason they're not absent is because they are attending a different school. And potentially double dipping funding for that student. So we really, a lot of the times it's written in the report on the attendance report. Other times it's a report that a secretary receptionist provides, but that is information we will ask for. The school district information isn't maintained. So a lot of the times we'll get the application support and then the school district information isn't in the file, which again requires a little bit more time. And then it isn't updated if the student moved from the prior year. So if you have continuing choice students that come year after year and they move, you always want to be making sure that you are obtaining district verification information. If the student hasn't moved, you can obviously maintain the district information into the application, and it can be in there when you provide it to the auditors. But if they move, making sure you get that updated. That's a lot of the times missed. And then residency documentation. This is a big one here, that the documentation isn't an allowable documentation. This is a big one. A lot of the times we'll see things like cell phone bills, or they have Verizon per se, and you're thinking, oh yeah, Verizon bill, fine. But if you look at the Verizon bill or AT&T bill, it's only a cell phone. It's not any other type of services that would be connected to a dwelling. So a landline, for example. So you really want to make sure that you're verifying that it is truly a residence documentation that's allowable, that is proving that they live at that place. Obviously, there are the dating requirements, making sure it's within the right date. We're not going to specify that stuff here because it is on that checklist, making sure that you have proper dates depending on the type of residency documentation you're receiving. But it is, again, important to double check that and that you're getting the right information. Or what ends up happening is it is correctable. Like, let's say in the audit, we've identified that it was a cell phone bill, not allowed. You do have the time to reach out to the parent to get the updated residency documentation, but it has to be in that reporting period that you were required to get the original residency documentation. So that also can be a bit difficult for parents to potentially go all the way back 9 months from now to get that residency documentation. And again, if you're relying on them, that's time that could potentially cause a delay in getting the report finished by December 15th. And the key thing here too is that updated residency doc, although allowable for us to have you get a new one, we have to get it before we finalize too. So it has to be submitted. And obviously, if you are late and can't finish on the 15th, and in my experience, I haven't had to deal with that, but then regardless, it was due on the 15th, so you wouldn't be allowed to submit it. So you really don't want to, through this process, and I'll keep reiterating it, you don't want to be in a position where you are relying on a parent to provide you something, because it could have unfortunate results otherwise. Income documentation isn't the correct document, as I already mentioned, or potentially, again, the matching, whether that's the residence or income documentation, the name's not matching. So making sure you're getting that email if for some reason one of the parents is using an abbreviated name. Okay. So in eligibility issues. So the previous slide was issues that are correctable. So we can, like, if there's name changes, discrepancies, anything like that need to be updated on DPI's end, we can present those to DPI on Schedule 3 and have them updated. Even district information as well. That all is stuff that can be correctable. Some common things that would immediately take them from out of the program and you do not get funding for that student is a couple things. And a couple key things that we commonly see is that they weren't in attendance, whether when I say on account date, before or after too. So they just weren't in attendance at all and were incorrectly accepted as a choice application. That would deem them ineligible. The student is potentially too young. So if they are in kindergarten, 5K kindergarten, and they're actually 4 years old, automatically ineligible. So you can't have them be too young into the program. Income is above the allowable amount. Supporting documentation wasn't provided. So that's where I mentioned previously that if you end up not being able to get any of the information by the day of the 15th, there's nothing we can do. We have to deem them ineligible. And then it has happened, rarely, but it has happened where a student has been accepted into both of them and have been put into the process as both. So if we take DPI's choice report and their SNSP report they provide us and compare them, the student is on both of those reports. It's not a matter of we had seats for both, the parents picked, and they ended up being in they decided choice or SNSP, that's fine. But if they are actually being reported to DPI as being in both programs, so that would be double dipping. They can't be funded by choice and funded by SNSP. Regarding applications, we do take a look at waiting lists. So any student that is on the waiting list, we have to review income and residency supporting documentation to ensure that if for some reason someone that's currently in the choice program drops out and now this student can be added, that they are allowed to be added and allowed to be on the waiting list. So we will request those applications as well. For the waiting list, it is not a sample. It is 100% of individuals on the waiting list we do have to look at. So it's not just current students, it's also waiting list. It is not, however, if for some reason you had an application and the individual declined. So we're not looking for anything that doesn't show up on either the current or the waiting list, just to make sure I reiterate that point. Again, typically the waiting list is going to be similar non-compliance with just regular current applications where the residency support might not be the right one, income might not be the right one, potentially name issues, etc. So we do take a look at the student information system SIS. We take a look at user access and understand how access is given and who has editable access. A lot of the times with our small schools, there is not an ability to completely make teachers not have editable access to certain things, or administrators. So like the choice administrator should not have editable access, but a lot of the times they need it to perform their job responsibilities. So that's where we kind of go into the fact that you have to sign the attendance records, the teachers do, to verify that accuracy, since potentially the information can be edited in the student information system. We also take a look at how things are maintained. Are you able to pull historical information? Per DPI, you are required to obtain information for the last 6 years. So you should have the enrollment records from the last 6 years. It should be maintaining that, whether it's cloud or backup, etc. And then we do compare the student roster that is coming from the information system to the attendance records, as I had previously mentioned. And if there is a tagged option, so facts, I know you can do a tag for choice students. If there is that tag, we get a report and verify that the tags were properly placed on students' profiles. And I accidentally double clicked. So all pupil count, we have to select 60 non-choice students from the student roster to review and compare to the attendance records. This is where I get a lot of questions from clients. They're like, hey, you're testing choice. Why are you testing non-choice students? Why are you asking me about attendance records for non-choice students? We are required. So we have to select 60. If there's errors, we have to keep selecting an additional sample of 60 until there's no more students to test. And this is where I was mentioning with the student roster and attendance records, making sure those are up to date as of the student, as of the count date. And that attendance record, making sure before and after is present for all students. It's not just you're looking at choice students to make sure you have the right attendance records for us you have to make sure all students have, whether it's attendance for the day of or before and after, because we will ask for it if it's not there. And we ended up selecting the student that you didn't provide and who was absent. So it's good, best practice that you're getting that information overall for all students, not just choice. With this, a lot of the times we come up with those differences. Potentially we're testing a student that actually wasn't there. There has been situations where on the roster, there wasn't a student identified that wasn't on the attendance records that should have been and maybe was missing and didn't get generated. So things like that potentially do happen. They're just more not as common. Tuition, this one, we just have to make sure choice students are not charged tuition. So obviously there are certain fees that they have to pay, whether that's potentially like an athletic fee, but they should not be being charged tuition. And so we will, a lot of times, FACS, I keep bringing that up. FACS is used a lot for tuition management and the SIS system. And so we will have you pull a tuition report to verify that students were not invoiced tuition. Or we will look at potentially general ledger if in QuickBooks and look at your invoicing of students. So that is something we do take a look at. For SNSP side of things, we also are comparing that choice report and SNSP report to make sure there's no double counting. So that is an actual step. As I kind of mentioned, we rarely ever, but it has happened where they will be both submitted into both programs. And we have to put them into the program the parents accepted them for. So that is something that will be listed again if it comes out that they are in both programs, they're ineligible for one of them, if that was the only issue. 4K parental outreach. So this is something, if you don't have it, we don't obviously test it. So if you don't have 4K and you are just operating as potentially high school, middle school, high school, etc., we won't have to do anything here. If you have a parental outreach, so this is specifically 4K, specifically for the parents. So if you are offering an outreach program for 4K parents, offer to all 4K parents to do these extra activities, and you are required to be meeting this 87.5 hours for activities, we very much look at those to make sure that the activities qualify, as well as the hours are properly calculated and you're not over calculating hours or potentially there was a typo error, etc. And making sure there's an educational component to these. And again, it's all 4K parents, not just choice. One thing we do take a look at we look at your activities and the list of your activities, and then we will request logs since it has to be considered into the 87.5 hours. One person, parent needs to be involved in the activity. So we do take a look at activity logs as well. And in September, obviously, you're going to have planned activities into the fall and through winter and the spring. And so we just have your schedule to make sure that it's reasonable that you have the hours planned. And then come January, we take a look at more logs that have occurred between the count dates and to make sure that anything from that time going to the end of the school year is going to get you the remaining of those hours. Just making sure I did not skip a slide. Summer school, again, this is one like 4K outreach. If you don't offer summer school for choice students, this isn't applicable and we won't test it. If we are testing it, we have to obtain a copy of the summer school payroll registers. We will then compare the course listing that you submitted to DPI to the actual schedule that you are presenting to families. We have to make sure that there's at least 270 minutes. And then we have to compare attendance records from what was reported to DPI to actual attendance records. So these records should be signed, verified by teachers, and maintained throughout summer school. A lot of the times what ends up happening with this is the incorrect attendance number for the student was submitted to DPI. So just making sure that what you're submitting to DPI, and the same thing goes for courses, the minutes will vary. So really just making sure that what you're submitting is supported and backed up on, because we will be verifying that. I keep double clicking today. I think that was like triple clicking, but last component here is we also have to verify daycare students are not choice students. So if you have a 3K level that you're offering at your school and is classified as a daycare and are not involved in the choice program side of things, we have to verify that there is no one in daycare that is a choice student. So verifying that as well. Pretty easy test. Again, if you don't offer daycare, then obviously we're not doing the test. And that's kind of why, again, we're asking those processes and procedures and that background information up front to make sure that we are testing what's required. And if you don't have it, then we obviously don't test it. Key takeaways. So making sure you have all the required documentation for applications is maintained and available prior to the start of field work. Making sure information matches. If there are weird, unusual situations, don't be afraid to reach out to DPI or your auditors. If you do reach out to DPI and they provide you with responses on how to proceed, maintaining those responses, because we will take a look at those to make sure that everything correlates and we're not issuing you potentially an ineligible application because we see something, but then actually DPI provided you with different guidance or an exception, etc. And making sure, again, can't say this enough, utilizing the application spreadsheet on DPI's website. This is vital to ensure that you are not missing anything and that everything can be provided to the auditors and there's not this, again, delay with potentially reaching out to people. So any questions? I know there was one. Okay, perfect. So if you're saying the question was, if we don't have non-choice students on the all pupil count, what is the procedure? So if you're saying your entire school is choice students, then we wouldn't test, we would be testing all the choice students' attendance a part of the application procedure and not a part of the all pupil count procedure. So either way, it's either we're testing all the applications. Again, there's that sampling of the 125 or 15%, whatever is greater. And if you don't have any private paying students, then don't get to test anything. Any other questions? That was the only other question that came through. Oh, here's another one. Do the parents' names need to match the student management system like PowerSchool, Fax, etc.? So we are not comparing at any point student parents' names with the documents you're provided. So let's say you have, I'm going to go back to Joe and Joseph. If you have Joe as the parent of a choice student and Joe is what's in your information system, but the legal name, what's on DPI and the residency is Joseph, we're not testing that. It's only the student name that we test that's in the SIS system to the attendance. Perfect. Any other questions that I can help you all out with today? Great question. So another one is the application spreadsheet for SNSP. Is there one? I think I mentioned it like 5-6 times to use the choice one. There is. It's also under their application process on the DPI website to complete with SNSP applications. Because SNSP, there is a lot of stuff that could potentially be missed, or timing, which again, I'm going to train on that next year, but very important that you're utilizing the application checklists. Resources, again, can't reiterate, looking at DPI, they have a lot of information there that's helpful. And they have those checklists, additional support that will really help to make sure you are not in a position to have an ineligible student. We don't want you to have an ineligible student. I know you don't want to, the parents don't want to. So really making sure you're utilizing those application checklists, trainings like this. I keep offering them, and I hope it's beneficial to you all and you're getting something out of it. Obviously, if there's something you're looking for as a special training, feel free to reach out. We do offer advisory services as well. But with that, that was all I had. I'm not seeing any other last minute questions. So here's kind of my contact information. That's the generic Wagner phone number, but there's my email address. If for some reason you do have a question or want to connect, or you can call and they can reach me as well. But I just want to take this time to thank you for coming. Yeah, I really appreciate it, and appreciate that there's interest and questions that you all are having. And we try to support our clients and others too, to make sure that they can have a successful audit. So with that, have a great rest of your day, week, and weekend. And hopefully you get some dry weather. Around here, it's raining. So thank you and have a great rest of your day.